Now I do make sure that the birds have to drink all this water in a day, and to do this I withdraw the water the night before so that they are thirsty in the morning. They then guzzle down the wormer, and by lunchtime we can then give them fresh water to drink. Now some people might say, well, worming the flock of pigeons is not as good as giving an individual capsule to a bird. Perhaps it isn't. When you're giving an individual capsule to a bird, you know for sure that that bird has received the correct dose of wormer. But I would say that worming a whole flock is a very time-consuming operation, and birds do drink. They are sure to drink this medicated water, especially since they're thirsty from the night before, and it doesn't make the water too unpleasant to taste. So this is a very suitable method of worming the birds.
Sounds good to me. We discussed coccidiosis, we discussed canker, worming, respiratory infections.
Well, respiratory infections, again, have been proved to be present in all pigeons. Respiratory infection is commonly caused by the organism known as mycoplasma, which is a little organism that's partway between a bacteria and a virus. Now, many different species of mycoplasma have been found in pigeons, and it's debatable whether all these species of mycoplasma are equally serious for the pigeons. But if we assume that any mycoplasma in the respiratory system of an athlete will impede that athlete's performance, then we again ought to routinely medicate these birds to ensure that they have a low level or a non-level of mycoplasmosis in them.
This microplasma you talk about, how does it spread within the loft?
Well, mycoplasma is an organism that lives in the respiratory tract of the birds, so it is breathed in and out. So it is spread in the air that the bird breathes. So it is easily spread in crowded lofts and lofts with poor ventilation. So the worst sort of environment you could have for the spread of mycoplasmosis is a warm, stuffy, poor ventilated loft, or of course a carrying basket. Now carrying baskets are well known in the pigeon owning fraternity as sources of mycoplasmosis. There will be many pigeons that have come home with mycoplasmosis that have been shut in a carrying basket for half a day. So ventilation is of the utmost importance to prevent mycoplasmosis. And also, we can reduce the level of mycoplasmosis by routine preventive medicine, medicating the birds twice a year to kill off some of these mycoplasmosis.
What are the symptoms of mycoplasmosis?
Well, they're very similar to the symptoms that you would have with a respiratory infection. Difficult breathing, squeaky breathing, noisy breathing, catarrh in the nostrils and mouth, so you get birds that are bunged up and with dirty feathers where they've been shaking the phlegm out of their nostrils and their mouths, and the birds are debilitated and quiet and not able to fly. They're not able to perform properly because they can't breathe efficiently.
And what treatment would you recommend?
Well, we're very fortunate in the mycoplasma organism is sensitive to a wide range of antibiotics. So any broad-spectrum antibiotic should be effective against mycoplasmosis. We are fortunate in having a licensed, for pigeons, antibiotic on the market called Vetramox. That's amoxicillin, which is a broad-spectrum antibiotic that is effective against mycoplasmosis. Then we have a whole range of other antibiotics which aren't licensed for use in pigeons, but are effective against mycoplasmosis. And these include such products as Tylan, erythromycin, Thiamutin.
Baytril.
Baytril, yes. Baytril's a new antibiotic that's proved to be very effective against mycoplasmosis, as against a lot of other infections. But there's no shortage of antibiotics that are effective against mycoplasmosis. So we're not stuck for something to use.
Of course, another problem, particularly in the late 80s and 90s, is paramyxo. What's your views?
Well, paramyxovirus is a virus infection, which means that it's very contagious. And the big concern about paramyxovirus infection is that it's also a disease of our poultry flock. Now, if a virus infection gets into our poultry flock, where it's called Newcastle disease, it would decimate our national poultry flock. And as a consequence of this, the Ministry of Agriculture get very concerned about paramyxo being about. So it is what's known as a notifiable disease, which means that if you suspect, that's not only a veterinary surgeon, but if an owner suspects that you might have paramyxovirus infection in the loft, he must inform the Ministry of Agriculture so that they can come and investigate it. Now, if the Ministry come and investigate it and find that it is paramyxovirus, they have special powers which enable them, if necessary, to slaughter all your birds. But in practical terms, they are more likely to give you advice about controlling the virus infection. The big trouble with paramyxovirus is that there is a long period of time when the birds are excreting virus and spreading the disease when they are showing no symptoms of disease. So all the time during this incubation period, the birds are spreading disease. And that is a big worry, because by the time you've diagnosed disease, it may well have spread around the bird population.
What are the symptoms of paramyxovirus?
Well, initially it usually causes diarrhea, but very often the symptom that's most noticed is a nervous symptom. Birds somersaulting, tumbling over, walking on their wings, not being able to walk properly, mispecking the food, missing the corn. So it's predominantly known as a nervous disease.
How do we prevent this paramyxovirus?
Well, fortunately, there is a vaccine developed against this virus infection. And birds should be vaccinated voluntarily every year, but it really makes good sense to do it because it should prevent the infection getting into your loft. And I think anybody in the pigeon fraternity that's had paramyxo in their loft will tell you the dire consequences of that infection. So it is compulsory to vaccinate birds that are flying across the channel, and this is done just once a year, and it costs a very small amount of money.
Of course, another disease among pigeons which attack the nervous system is the dreaded salmonella, paratyphus, paratyphoid E. coli, etc. What's your observations on that?
Well, salmonella is a very widespread disease. It's present in a lot of wild birds, a lot of rats and mice, and it is a bacterial disease. The main problem with salmonella, which causes diarrhea, is that animals find it very difficult to get rid of the bacteria and therefore become carriers of the disease. Now, a carrier of salmonella could well have no symptoms, but will be excreting the salmonella organism continuously. Now, this carrier is excreting the organism onto the floor, and susceptible pigeons could well pick it up, and it produce diarrhea and disease in them. And if it leaves the guts, it can get into the circulation and settle in the nervous system or the joints and cause the symptoms of, common symptoms of paratyphoid, which are wing lameness and nervous symptoms, tumbling over, which are very similar to those of paramyxovirus infection. So salmonella is quite a common disease. It is, of course, a disease of humans, so if you've got salmonella in your pigeons, you've got to look out to be catching salmonella yourself, which is also a concern.
And it's also notifiable, I understand.
Yes, because it affects humans, it is notifiable, which means that if you have it confirmed, you must notify the Ministry of Agriculture.
So we've discussed the symptoms. Prevention?
Well, the easiest way of preventing salmonella is to prevent contact with vermin that carry salmonella. Now, this means wild birds, rats and mice. Now, it may be easy to prevent contact with rats and mice. You can keep vermin out of your loft. But it is difficult to prevent contact with wild birds. If you let your pigeons go for a flight, they may well land at a watering hole where wild birds have been depositing salmonella-contaminated droppings, and that way they will pick up salmonella.
So it's very much a hit-and-miss situation from your point of view until you find the correct one.
It can take an awful lot of time and effort to eliminate salmonella, and then of course the birds can go out and catch it again from the same source as they caught it in the first place. So it can be a very difficult condition, especially if the owner catches it as well. Fortunately, the commonest cause of salmonella infection in pigeons is not too serious in humans, but there are forms that the pigeons could catch, for instance from pigs, which are frequently fatal in humans, which is why the Ministry of Agriculture want to know about it.
We've discussed the virtues of POM products and what they can do. 1996, the world is going green. Brewer's yeast, garlic and so forth, teas and so forth. What's your opinions on these products?
Well, there is a whole range of these sort of products, none of which have a license. And I think the reason they haven't got a license is that the active ingredient is so safe and incapable of being misused that they don't need a license. I know there are an awful lot of different products on the market, and most pigeon owners have a favorite and are happy to use it. I am not convinced of their effectiveness. I don't use it, I don't recommend them. But I quite accept that some people prefer to use them, like to use them on a routine basis, and I respect that. They range from teas, garlic, homeopathic remedies, probiotics, multivitamins, a whole range of products, iron tonics, liquid livers, a whole range. There's a selection here of them, a very small percentage of them, if I might say. But I think by and large, if you've got a problem and you can identify a problem, you ought to stick to a remedy that's been proved to work in that problem. Green products are perhaps best regarded as a preventative measure.
So they have their use in a preventative way?
Perhaps, yes.
But surely there's a place for multivitamins?
Well, yes, but I think in common with most scientists, I would have to agree that vitamins are the most overused medicinal product on the market. They pander to people's fear that the modern lifestyle and the modern diet leaves them deficient in vitamins. And there's no real evidence to support this. A racing pigeon is on a good mixed diet, and you need vitamins in very small quantities. I feel quite sure that a normal diet contains adequate amount of vitamins. Now, there are circumstances which increases the need for vitamins, and periods of stress, such as molting, breeding, racing, are periods when you may need more vitamins to function normally. Another period of time when you certainly need multivitamins is after a period of antibiotics. Now, antibiotics kill bacteria, therefore they kill bacteria in the guts. And certain vitamins, vitamin K, vitamin B6, biotin, pyridoxine, are produced by these bacteria in the guts. These bacteria have a useful function. They produce vitamins. If you give them a dose of antibiotic, it kills them, and therefore they don't produce multivitamins. So a supplement with multivitamins would be useful. An alternative way of getting around this problem is to give the bird an extra dose of the bacteria that normally live in the guts. And these products are known as probiotics. They are a suspension of living bacteria that normally inhabit birds' guts. So they seed the gut and produce vitamins just like the original bacteria would do. So you can either give multivitamins or probiotics to get around this problem. But the use of multivitamins has long been established as a good way around this problem. And I wouldn't argue with the use of multivitamins. Multivitamins satisfy the desire of the owner to overcome an envisaged potential problem. And that problem may exist or may not exist, but it certainly doesn't do any harm to give multivitamins.
Among the many preparations of multivits in the market, which one do you recommend?
Well, you're quite right in saying that there are many on the market. There's a multitude to choose from. And I would say that if you're using any multivitamin, you're using something which is beneficial. Personally, I use a multivitamin called Petronvet because I'm used to it. I know what's in it. And I know it covers every possible eventuality that I might come across. So I stick with that.
Tell me, your observations on what we've talked about this afternoon, what sticks out in your mind, or what is your advice to pigeon fanciers?
Well, I think they must realise that if they ever see disease in their pigeons, this is just the tip of an iceberg. So one pigeon might be poorly with disease, but the whole loft will be affected by the same disease. So individual birds don't need treating in isolation from the rest of the loft. When you treat one bird, you must treat the whole loft. And this is very important, especially with routine medication. Now, routine medication for worms and for respiratory disease is perhaps best done twice a year, before and after racing. Routine medication for coccidiosis is best done before the youngsters hatch. In other words, a pairing up, and again mid-season. Routine medication for canker is best done prior to the birds producing crop milk. So again during incubation, and also perhaps later in the season. Now, another important thing to remember to do is vaccination against paramyxovirus. So that's done once a year. And on top of all this, we must keep the loft clean and dry. We must also ensure that the birds are fit. Now, I will never be a very fast runner because I'm not fit, but I'd be a damn sight faster if I went out and got fit. I would also probably be faster if I ate differently. So diet is very important. Training is very important. And breeding is also equally important. You can quite easily see that I'm not as good a runner as Sebastian Coe. That's because my genetic makeup is not the same as Sebastian Coe. If it was, I'd run just as fast as him. And if I trained faster, trained better, I'd run faster. Perhaps if I ate more sensibly, I would run faster. So having a winning pigeon is a combination of health, diet, and breeding. It's not a single factor. It's a combination of factors, of which health is only one.
Ectoparasites, creepy crawlies, fleas, red mites, bugs. Very dangerous.
Well, ectoparasites live on the outside of a bird and they suck tissue fluid, sometimes blood, and they include lice, red mite, and it's only red because it sucks blood, feather mite, and moths, for instance, might not be regarded as an ectoparasite, but they land on the bird and irritate its skin, stop it sleeping. A tired bird can't race as well. But let's go back to the ectoparasites that are real parasites, the bloodsuckers. Now, lice, red mite, suck blood, that's blood the bird needs to perform efficiently. So anything that sucks blood is not a good idea. Now, red mite is a particularly creepy, sneaky little individual because it likes the dark. So you never see it unless you go in at night with a torch and look at your birds. It hides in the nooks and crannies in the daylight, comes out at night, sucks blood off the bird and disappears in the daytime into the nooks and crannies. So you can either kill it at night on the bird, or you can kill it during the day in the nooks and crannies. Feather mites live in the quills and the bases of the feathers. They have to be killed either by an insecticide spray or by something that gets into the bloodstream, and when sucked by these tissue suckers, kills them. And an example of that is the horseworm ekphalan. Lice, they're similarly killed by sprays or dips or by a ekphalan wormer that gets into the bloodstream. I would regard all ectoparasites as undesirable. I don't think you'd like them on you, would you?
Hardly, David. Tell me something. Question I'm often asked is, why do we vaccinate for paramyxo once a year whilst human beings are vaccinated, say, once in a lifetime for polio or something?
Well, before they were granted a license for the use of these vaccines against paramyxovirus, they had to do an awful lot of research and tests on these vaccines. And these tests discovered that the immunity that these vaccines caused in the birds lasted sometimes only 12 months. So in order to protect birds, they have to vaccinate them or revaccinate them every 12 months. Now, if the vaccine had been found to last 3 years, they would have vaccinated them every 3 years. But it wasn't every 3 years, it was every year. So every year you have to vaccinate your birds if you want to maintain the immunity.
Fine. Diet. The way I feed my pigeons is variety is the spice of life, to cover all eventualities of poor or inferior grain within the mix. Good idea?
I think that's a splendid idea, yes. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that at all.
Good. Breeding, very simply and very briefly. Inbreeding, is there a problem, you think, among racing pigeons from a health point of view?
Well, inbreeding is increasing the genetic characteristics that you want. So presumably if you've got two good racing pigeons, you breed them together to increase the chances of their offspring being good racing pigeons. But you also increase the chances of the unpleasant characteristics being increased as well. And the best example I can think of in this is the breeding of pedigree dogs. I mean, any pedigree dog I can think of has a list of 2 or 3 genetic diseases which are brought about by inbreeding. They are increased by inbreeding. So as a general principle, inbreeding is not a good idea.
Floor dressing. Some people advocate deep litter, some people clean out. From a veterinary point of view, is there any disadvantage with either or any advantages with either?
Well, what you must ensure on with the floor is that it doesn't contain organisms that are infective, that cause disease. So you look to keeping the floor clean and therefore getting rid of the organisms, or dry, and therefore not allowing the organisms to survive. So either way, deep litter that's dry or a clean floor is an equally good idea.
The word dry is paramount, of course.
Absolutely, yes.
Fine. I'm just starting pigeons a day. What would you say to me are the golden rules I must do?
You must feed them well. You must maintain good ventilation in the loft. Now, ventilation is much more important than temperature, for instance. A cold, well-ventilated loft is a lot better than a warm, poorly ventilated loft. Ventilation is paramount importance. You must also maintain them healthy, which is what I, as a veterinary surgeon, is mainly concerned about. But fitness, feeding, and training is equally important.
And overcrowding, of course, is...
Well, overcrowding will, yes, of course, increase contamination of the floor, contamination of the air, stuffiness, lack of ventilation. Yes, I'm sorry, yes, I forgot about overcrowding.
David, I thank you for your input. I know you're writing a second version of your one of your earlier one, which was a bestseller. I look forward to that, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
That book I was referring to is produced by Petron, which will be published very shortly in conjunction with the video. I would like to thank George Slattery for allowing us to use his marvellous and picturesque garden, despite the background of Biggin Hill. I hope you enjoy the video, and thank you.
The pigeons what I've got now, the oldest one is 2-year-old. A lot of pigeons come into their own when they're 3 or 4-year-old. So, and that's when I should concentrate on the channel more. At the time, I've just been racing pigeons inland and sending the widowwood hens across the channel, which I've had them back and I've got positions with them, you know, but I think as they get older, they'll get better. Before I decided to get another loft, I did have a good look around. I went to Petron's factory in Yorkshire and I see how they made them, and I was quite pleased, and obviously I bought other ones since. And that one's 4-year-old and still looks new, you know. I've had no trouble with them whatsoever. Well, they're finished off nice in regards to woodwork part of it. The roof and the ventilation is good. I've got electric rollers in there what come from Petron's, which is so easy to keep them clean, especially when you've got young ones, because if you don't clean them out very often, they smell. If you clean them out all the time, they smell, but you can cut it down with the rollers, which a matter of switching on them takes a couple of minutes and it's done. Like, you know, it's, they're so easy to clean. They're just, well, I've bought a set there and I've got several sets since, and I'm quite pleased with them. And everyone I know who has bought them have had more. And they're always bringing out different ideas and changing their, so you just got to keep up. They are good, you know. I don't think you can beat them.